My name is David, and I come from Maine. To keep things straightforward, I used to compete in amateur boxing matches, trying to make it onto the pro circuit. Between fights, I worked for a private security company back home in Portland to make ends meet. I had this idea that security work was mainly about standing at the door of bars, like a bouncer. But I soon realized there was way more to private security than just throwing out drunk guys. Sure, that was a big part of it, but once in a while, we'd get a gig that was totally out of the ordinary. For example, there was a time I had to guard a religious place because some absolute idiots camped out trying to scare the folks going in and out. We also got hired to watch over a nursery. Sounds crazy, right? But apparently, some lunatic had been threatening the kids, and the security guard couldn't track him down. Without a doubt, the strangest and most unforgettable job I ever worked on was a funeral, but not just any funeral. It was for the leader of one of Portland's biggest crime syndicates. I'm dead serious. This was back in 1999 when I was 23, and I'd gotten used to odd gigs by then. But when my boss told me we were supposed to guard a funeral on a Friday morning, I had to ask for details. No one else in the crew looked too happy about it either, and when we finally got the full story, we just couldn't believe our eyes. Now, I doubt many people listening would recognize the name, but if you remember the Portland Underground back then, and I say the Marshalls, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. Well, Big Joey Marsh had kicked the bucket that Friday morning, and since his family was well known for being absolutely insane, violent, drunk, and wild, his funeral needed a whole lot of security. I honestly believed it too, considering that a family so volatile and reckless, with that much booze and grief flying around, probably looked like a full-on UFC fight night by the time the buffet line opened. That was the joke we all shared at the time, but we didn't realize how spot-on we were. We'd been told we'd only be needed at the Marshal's house, not the church service, because that's where the real party would start once the alcohol flowed. On the day of the funeral, we showed up around 11 a.m. at this enormous mansion on the outskirts of Portland. I'd never seen anything like it in personally on TV. It looked like some fairy tale castle on the outside, but was modern inside. They even had a full-time maid who showed us around before the family returned from the church, and it was our job to keep everything secure. The first Range Rovers started pulling up outside around 11:30, and from them came a steady stream of crying older women, supported by their sons and nephews. Honestly, it looked like any other funeral except, of course, everyone was dressed to the nines in Gucci and Prada, with more bling on their wrists and shoes than in a New York fashion show. I couldn't tell if the shiny leather on their shoes or the diamond watches on their wrists reflected the sunlight brighter. You might think crime doesn't pay, but with that kind of display, I'd say they were doing pretty well. The mood was tense at first, understandable given the family's reputation, violent gangsters, and the potential for chaos. But aside from that, it was pretty much a regular funeral for the first couple of hours. Honestly, one of the toughest parts early on was refusing all the drinks they kept offering. They were a crazy bunch, sad, angry, but also grieving like any Irish family, crying over their loved one, hugging and sharing tears. After all that, somewhere around 2 p.m., everyone started to loosen up. Spirits high, music pounding inside the house, and us guys started to think maybe we'd overthought the whole thing. We pictured some family squabble that would explode into violence. But in reality, we were more likely to get hit on by drunk women in their 50s than witness any violence. We still had 4 more hours of guard duty, and these seemed like the easiest hours we'd had all day. That was until it happened. The backyard of that mansion stretched out huge, legitimately massive. There was a big lawn, a mini football pitch, tennis courts, a pond, and a gazebo. We had 4 guys patrolling around the house, myself included, with 2 more inside, rotating constantly to give them a break from the relentless harassment of middle-aged women. I was chatting with one of my fellow guards up front when suddenly, we both heard a guy in the back talking on his radio. Someone had started banging loudly on the backyard fence, and the next thing, we heard him curse before everything went quiet. We rushed around back of the house and saw it just in time. A man dressed all in black, wearing a balaclava, smashing his way through the fence with a sledgehammer. He gave it one last big bash to really open it up, and then about a dozen guys, all dressed the same way, spilled through baseball bats, hammers, clubs in hand. Aside from a few brass knuckles we kept hidden, nobody on our team was armed enough to handle something like that. So instead, we focused on getting everyone inside and locking down the back doors. But one of those doors was a big glass sliding door, and you can imagine how well that held up. The masked gang just smashed their way right in as we were shuffling everyone out the front or upstairs to safety. That's when the second big problem hit us. Many of the people inside, still drunk and disoriented, had no idea what was happening until it was too late. They thought someone had just shown up for a fight, and in their intoxicated state, they were eager to jump into a scrap without realizing the attackers had weapons. The resistance was weak, mostly drunk men and their family, trying to throw punches, some landing a couple of hits that knocked an attacker out temporarily, only for the gang to swarm in and beat him until he was either screaming or unconscious. They did what they had to do, I guess, giving the security team enough time to get the women and kids into cars or upstairs out of harm's way. But it didn't take long for the gang to push past what little resistance there was. They started heading upstairs, toward the main corridor, and I was terrified, thinking we'd never hold them off. Surprisingly, Joey had already planned for this kind of thing. His bedroom was stocked with some pretty unorthodox but highly effective weapons, big historical weapons, including a samurai sword, some Zulu short spears, and a huge broadsword reputed to have belonged to some king from a place called Leicester. I didn't know about this stuff at first. I only saw them when one of Joey's old grandmothers started handing them out to us upstairs. One minute, it was like being at a rock concert, next thing, like being in some medieval battlefield. By the time we formed a line at the stairway, the attackers were already hurt and sprawled across the kitchen floor, some unconscious, some seriously injured. One of our security guys was badly hurt too, lying there in pain. They still wanted more. When they saw us blocking the stairs, they hesitated just for a second, probably realizing they'd underestimated us. I remember gripping that Zulu spear and warning the leader of the gang that if he tried to come up the stairs, I'd skew him like a shish kebab. The look on his face when he saw me pointing that spear was priceless, like he'd seen a ghost. That overwhelming surprise worked in our favor, and no one dared to challenge me. We had a tense standoff on the stairs, with screams, shouts, and threats flying everywhere. Meanwhile, upstairs, the women and kids started throwing anything they could find, stiltos, small statues, big glass ashtrays down at the attackers below. I saw an ashtray land right on one guy's head, and he instantly collapsed, twitching and shaking. His mates started screeching, trying to wake him up. The debris kept coming, and I swear that saved us. Though we had formed that line of defense, we were still outnumbered and poorly armed. One swing of that sledgehammer or one lucky hit and I'd be dead. I knew that. But it was those women up top yelling and throwing everything they had that kept the gang back. That chaos, that raw defiance, was what ultimately forced them to retreat to the backyard. When they finally retreated, the house's hallway resembled a slaughterhouse of blood, shattered glass, debris everywhere. They'd smashed what they could on their way out, probably as a parting shot. The damage done to the family's men was worse. I've never seen such injuries, their arms and legs broken, ribs cracked, skulls fractured, teeth smashed, fingers hanging limply, and one guy's eye popped out after a brutal skull wound. We had to get all the kids upstairs so the EMTs could work outside. It was heartbreaking. We had to hide their eyes from the blood and chaos, and the screams finally died down when the paramedics started pumping painkillers into the wounded. Even then, all that noise turned into moans and groans as the injured were loaded into ambulances. We'd been there a while, watched over the scene until help arrived, and despite everything, I thought everyone would give the Marshall's family a cold shoulder afterward. But strangely, even criminals and the usual tough guys told the EMTS everything about that attack, the masked gang, the weapons, everything. They might be rough, dangerous, or even involved in illegal stuff, but they knew how to talk when it mattered. That's often how criminals use security sometimes as a weapon to identify each other or communicate covertly. So, why attack a funeral like that? Who in their right mind would do something so twisted? As far as I know, the answer was simple. It was a rival family from Portland's underground Somion the Marshalls had wronged one too many times. And the why was just as clear, because they could. One of the guards who got hurt had to get stitched up many times over. He never returned to work. I also heard that the guy who was knocked out with the ashtray never went straight to the hospital. He couldn't. The brain injury was severine. He eventually showed up days later, begging for help because he kept having seizures. When doctors asked him what happened, he finally told them everything, including how he and his buddies raided the Marshall's place and that he got hit. The police then showed up, and he went to jail. His gang convinced him to keep his mouth shut, because they knew if he talked, they'd come after him once he was out. That was just the start. About 6 months later, some of their enemies started turning up dead all over Portland. Rumors say it was the Marshall's crew settling scores. I decided it was time to quit. I saw how some security firms in Maine had direct ties to the crime world. They were practically part of it. I asked my boss if we'd keep working with families like the Marshalls, and he told me honestly, no, we work for whoever pays us. Turns out, the ones paying big bucks often had their own reasons and they weren't always legal or clean. Later, I switched to a quieter security job with a company that mostly handled security for stores like HMV and Costco. The pay wasn't as good, but the pace was much calmer, and I could focus more on my boxing. My boxing career never took off as I'd hoped, but that was fine. I was content to live a peaceful life, raise a family, without the fear of masked thugs lurking around just waiting to attack when we least expected. I spent nearly a decade in the reserves before being medically discharged. I'll admit I was pretty devastated at first, but once I got over it, I realized I had options. Years earlier, a friend's dad told me, all you'll be able to do after the army is drive trucks and hurt people, but he was dead wrong. I received offers from some big private military contractors right away, good pay, easy medicals. One buddy even suggested I reach out to a guy working in the US who did training for Hollywood actors, teaching them how to shoot and move like soldiers. The hours sucked, but the money was great. I was seriously thinking about going over there to work with him. Then I talked to another old buddy in the security game who was doing close personal protection, aka bodyguard work, for high-profile stars in London. He traveled all over with celebrities during their visits, living a life of luxury outside work. It wasn't all glamour, though. After 18 months, I'd already been to places like the Maldives, Singapore, and St. Lucia twice. They fast-track ex-military guys because of their discipline. I slipped right in, and soon I was in the thick of it, covering events, escorting celebs, and doing close protection. It wasn't as adrenaline-pumping as being a soldier, but it scratched the same itch, staying alert, executing plans, showing force when needed. I was good at it, and I've been at it ever since. Initially, it seemed pretty basic. Teenage fans are loud, and honestly, they aren't as dangerous as Taliban fighters. But then I got a harsh lesson on the kind of people you really need to be prepared for. For the big events, we'd have extensive risk assessments. Most fans just wanted to meet their idols. Some would even apologize if they got caught trying to climb over barriers, thank us politely, or call their moms to come pick them up. But it wasn't all sweet. Sometimes you get the freaks, the kind of obsessives that are far from harmless. There was this guy we all knew about, let's call him Mike, who was clearly dealing with some serious mental health issues. Maybe he'd been treated, maybe not. I hope he'd turned his life around, but what I saw on his social media made my skin crawl. His obsession with the artist we were protecting went beyond admiration, was actively trying to hurt her. He fancied himself her husband in his mind and thought her relationships should be punished. I won't repeat the worst of it was disgusting, and honestly, I've never seen worse from some of the things I saw even during my service. He'd posted threats so serious, they sent chills down my spine. He even uploaded pictures of himself in a ninja suit, holding weapons he intended to use to get to her. That included pepper spray, a stun gun, gloves with steel knuckles, and dozens of knives. He boasted about having secret blueprints of the venue she'd be performing at, which made our security checks a lot more complicated. You see, if some lunatic is sitting outside, maybe with a camera or trying to sneak in, it's one thing. But if there's a determined nutjob with access and intent, it gets tough fast. In the UK, issuing credible threats of violence is a crime, so we'd often call the police, share the threats, the social media stuff, and most times, they'd do something about it. Not always, but if we could give them a name, address, and evidence, they'd usually take him in for the night. Once, Walker, the guy we're talking about, disappeared overnight. The police raided his place after he didn't answer his door, and witnesses said he'd been seen leaving that morning in black clothes carrying a large bag. So we knew he was probably nearby, waiting for a chance. That got us into full-on overdrive. We checked the area, secured every entrance, and made sure nothing was tampered with. Honestly, stalkers like Walker are a real pain. All that effort just for one lunatic. We weren't 100% convinced he was gone, so we kept our guard up, following our security plans and drills, hoping for the best. The crazy part, the night turned out totally quiet. We got the artist inside, kept a third layer of security in place, and then saw her safely back at her hotel. My team and I decided to do an all-nighter at the hotel floor, even though I'd already been working since midday and was dead tired. The plan was simple: one guard on each side of the corridor, another patrolling the wider hotel just in case. Most of the night passed smoothly, everything was calm. But that's the thing with events like this, any moment, things can go south fast. Sure enough, around 2:30 a.m., one of my colleagues on perimeter duty radios in that he'd spotted a car parked in a nearby industrial estate, across the street from the hotel. He said he was going to check it out and report back. A few minutes later, he called us and said the car looked empty and was giving him weird vibes. That's when I started feeling uneasy. Something was off. He then radioed that there was a lump under the blankets in the back seat, looked like a person sleeping underneath. Instantly, I thought it was probably our target, hiding or resting after seeing my guy approaching. So I suggested, just in case, to tap on the window to see if it was Walker or just someone taking a nap. Moments later, a hotel staff member pushed a trolley out in front of us, and I saw a younger man in a hotel uniform with short hair. I waved him past as I kept an ear on my earpiece. The guy nodded nervously and pushed a laundry trolley towards the VIP area. Then my colleague started saying that suddenly, the figure under the blankets didn't seem to move at all. The guy had leaned close enough to knock on the window, but no reaction. So he concluded that the car was empty, and that's bad news because we had an unaccounted-for vehicle right inside our primary security perimeter. We also had an unknown person nearby, which meant we couldn't let our guard down. Just as I was about to get serious, I noticed the hotel staff member trying to access the VIP corridor with his key. Cardinally, his card wasn't working. That's common sometimes, but then I watched him switch to a second and third card. All rejected. He looked more and more frustrated, increasingly nervous, and I figured I should check if he needed help. When I asked, his eyes widened in terror. I recognized the look. His short hair, poorly shaved, looked like he did it himself, and his face was covered in a scruffy beard. That's when I realized this was Walker, in a hotel employee disguise, standing right there in front of me. In the UK, it's highly illegal for personal protection officers like us to carry lethal weapons, and even non-lethal tools like stun guns or pepper spray can land us in serious trouble. but I carried a small dye spray on a keychain in my pocket, an alternative to pepper spray. It shoots a cloud of bright, quickly degrading paint that blinds the attacker temporarily. I'd used it once before. It worked just as I expected. But the success of that depends heavily on the situation and the person you're aiming at. When I saw Walker, I told him to stop and step back into the lift. Leave quietly. I was calling the cops. But he didn't like that. He tried to argue, pulling out a machete-style knife, what they call a zombie knife in the UK, hiding it in his coat. He charged at me, and I was ready. I blasted him right in the face with the dye spray, temporarily blinding him. His angry glare turned into frustration, but he knew exactly where I was now. While he lunged at me again, I had to get out of the way. The hallway was narrow. He swung his knife, grazing my chest. If it hadn't been for my stab vest, I'd have been dead for sure. The blade sliced through my shirt and the vest's fabric, but the armor absorbed most of it. Walker was slippery. He managed to twist out of my hold and pull his knife again. If I'd been unarmed, I'd be done for, but I kept my wits. He tried to attack again, this time with the curved part of his blade aiming for my head, but I shoved him forward and hit the emergency button on my radio. I silently called for backup. Minutes later, a colleague came rushing from the other end of the hall, and the security team started flooding the corridor. Walker, blinded and furious, swung his knife wildly, but because he was temporarily incapacitated, he kept swinging at nothing. We moved quickly, hurling a potted plant, knocking him down, grabbing his arm with the knife, and the hotel security team arrived to help. In no time, we had him subdued, and the cops arrived shortly after. Walker was arrested, and the whole thing was over in a flash. But what nobody's ever really explained was how he got his hands on the hotel uniform and those access cards. He didn't talk to the police, refused to plea at his trial, and wouldn't show up for sentencing. He never spoke a word, not a single thing. The only clues to his motives were his online posts, crazy, disturbing stuff. He'd spent months planning, even posting fake videos of terrorists, and knew all the right spots to target. His ability to program his fake access cards was pretty wild. I can respect that kind of skill even if I hate what he was trying to do. His method of slipping past security, changing his appearance, and showing up completely unrecognized was clever, almost professional. I'm pretty sure he had been in the hotel for a while, waiting for the right moment. That secret access, the fake uniform, the deception, everything about it was calculated. It's just a reminder. One lone, disturbed individual can cause an incredible amount of trouble with enough determination. Honestly, thinking about this stuff still gives me chills. The potential danger is real, and it only takes one person with bad intentions to change everything in an instant.